And we are joined by political analyst and researcher, Dr. Dale McKinley. Good to have you. Good evening to you, and thank you very much for making time for us, Dale. I'd like to latch on. Thank you. I'd like to latch on to this particular case of the arrest of the head of crime intelligence, Dumisani Khumalo. His case, coincidentally, in court today, but we now know that it's going to go back in February next year. And allow me to just tie a few things together before I get your comment on it. There are a number of examples that have been put up by members of parliament to say he is charged by what members of parliament see as an HR matter, basically the appointment and even promotion of a particular individual to a level of brigadier. And this is someone who has no police experience. And so he is facing corruption charges in court. Now, cases are then being pointed to by members of parliament to say there is a Mr. Firoz Khan. He is now a general. His promotion is being questioned, as you would have heard member James. You also have General Shadrach Sibiya, who is promoted in a speed of light to the level of deputy commissioner, and yet somewhere along the line he failed a competency test. How do you make sense of this kind of line of questioning, given the fact that Andrea Johnson's unit is the one that is currently prosecuting General Khumalo and his co-accused on the very same matter?
Sure. I think what is clear is that certain members of parliament are trying to draw inferences related to basically that IDAC is not being fair, that they are being selective in their prosecutions, and they're trying to, I think, create a picture, which is to say, you know, why haven't you done it the same? We've got the examples that you gave on other cases. And I think this is part of what we're seeing in this parliamentary ad hoc committee proceedings is, I think, you know, there are obviously a lot of legitimate questions that are being asked by some members of parliament, but there's a lot of politics at play here, depending upon which party is asking the question and who they are trying to get at. And I think in this case, they're very selective. So when Makunazi was there in front, you didn't find those same members asking him about his track record or some of the allegations that have been made against him in relation to his custodianship of KZN police politics. You didn't find them asking other questions of other individuals who they didn't really want to put under the spotlight. So I think we have to take all of this, we have to take it genuinely, but also with the sense that when it comes to parliament, politics is at play here, and people are basically trying to create certain discourses, whether there's some, you know, there's certainly, I think, questions that need to be answered by Andrea Johnson and IDAC. But I think, as she pointed out, quite a number of those cases were before her time, and she can't speak to those things. But the larger point here is that we've got problems. We've got problems within our prosecutorial authorities, problems within the police, and there's a lot of politicking, there's a lot of factions, and that's what's really coming out. If there's any real story, that sort of macro story that's coming out of all of these things, it's that there's just so many people that are compromised. There's so many back and forth and factions that it's hard to know exactly where to point the fingers at certain points.
You've put it so well, and let's crystallize it further, I will argue. And this is why I'm saying this. So you have heard a lot about the husband of Advocate Andrea Johnson. He is employed within crime intelligence. And we have heard the very same members of parliament saying you have a factionalized crime intelligence. And it appears, based on the line of questioning, that they are clearly saying if General Khumalo, who is being prosecuted by IDAC, that is run by Advocate Johnson, her husband works in the same crime intelligence unit. Here you have this case that the head of this unit is facing. Basically, Advocate Johnson is possibly being used by her husband to persecute someone who is potentially his opponent within crime intelligence. And this is why there is a headline that is being run from very early on that says, even in pillow talk, we don't discuss work. This is Andrea Johnson responding to whether or not they discuss work at home. Do you still take the route that says there's a lot of politicking, which I don't, by the way, I'm not gainsaying, but I'm asking whether you think there is a genuine case being pursued against General Khumalo, or are these members of parliament cherry-picking for political purposes?
I think it's a little bit of both, Morley. I mean, look, I don't know, and I don't think any of us know the details. And the problems with a lot of these commissions and the testimonies is that the evidentiary, basis and the facts are oftentimes lost in this case. We don't know what the specifics are in that case. We don't know exactly what the prosecutorial authorities are resting their case on, other than the fact of an irregular appointment. There might be more to it. We're not sure. They say they can't speak to those kinds of things. We have no idea whether or not her husband is being influenced, whether she's being influenced by her husband or not. These are things that make really good headlines. And they're interesting for us to ask those questions about. But my sense is that there is a lot of things. What I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't be just focusing on, this today was this testimony. But I think the larger question is whether Andrea Johnson or whether IDAC have been underperforming, or whether they've been used for political purposes. One could say exactly the same thing of crime intelligence under Khumalo, of Sibia's unit, of Masamolo at the National Commissioner level, of Makwenazi and the PKTT, of all of these different units. And each of those kinds of questions about influences, about who knows who's protecting who's back, who's against who, this is what's coming out. So I think it's too premature for us to draw conclusions. We can speculate, but to draw conclusions. But what is definitely the picture that is coming out is that we have institutions, both in terms of law enforcement and prosecutorial and otherwise, that are compromised, that are politicized, that have been weaponized. And this is the fundamental problem. And I hope that these commissions can raise these things and get beyond the politicking and get to the real stories, whoever is responsible, and hold them accountable.
Let's move on. You invoke the phrase, the performance of IDAC. And I think that's something that also was sort of raised sharply towards the latter part before they took a break. Today, here's another coincidence. So the head of IDAC is before these members of parliament answering questions in court. Angelo Agrizzi, this is someone whom, if memory takes us back, was involved in this Bosasa scandal that was part of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry around state capture. Listen to what has happened to him. He was given a suspended sentence today because he pleaded guilty to corruption and money laundering, therefore avoiding jail because he is going to turn state witness to assist Andrea Johnson's team, I suppose, to get to some of the people that are possibly involved in very, very serious criminality. What do we make of the performance of IDAC? This is a unit, by the way, that was only made permanent in August of last year.
Look, I think it's a mixed bag. I think they haven't had a lot of time, as you mentioned. I mean, we're talking about less than just over a year now to show themselves. The resources that they have, I know several people who work within this field, within government, and they all say the same thing, which is that the resource issue is a real issue. The capacitation, making sure that they've got enough investigators, particularly forensic investigators, to follow, that they're overloaded, that there's a range of different internal and operational challenges. So I think in that case, IDAC needs a lot of improvement. It needs to up its game. But at the same time, I think we are understandably so, we're impatient. We've seen all of people sort of not get away with things, and also prosecutions take years and years and years. And so people are saying, why aren't we doing these things quicker? You heard the parliamentarians asking similar questions. And are there just sort of selective cases that are being pushed and others that are being left behind? And I think this is the nature of what has happened to our institutions. They have been left with a very, very high, sort of expectation, and yet the resources and the capacitation to follow them is oftentimes not there. Having said that, I think in the case of Agrizi, we could go back and cite many cases. I think this is just the game that's played. Plea deals are made all the time, even with murderers and people who've committed grievous crimes in order to get the bigger fish. And I'm sure that if the prosecutorial authorities and IDAC is successful in tracking down and prosecuting some of the bigger fish in the Bosasa scandal, then people will probably forget this plea deal. But right now, it sort of sounds like, what were the backstories to these kinds of things? Is it really worth it? And we can't answer that question right now. So in some ways, I think it's still, again, a little bit early to say, but the bottom line is that IDAC needs to up its game, it needs to improve, and the public is expecting it to do so.
Yeah. You've made reference, Dale, to the criminal justice institutions and them being compromised. So I'm not going to fine-tune the question or the phrase and say how severely compromised. I think the question to you is what is to be done in order to revive them, because clearly they are on their knees right now. And I'm saying this now, moving away slightly from the ad hoc committee and looking at the Madlanga inquiry today, and testifying in that commission is the head of the Metro Police Department in Ekurhuleni, in the city of Ekurhuleni. And he is testifying, talking about his deputy, Julius Mkhwanazi, who appears to clearly have a special relationship with the man who sits in jail right now, Vusumuzi Ketmatlala, and how he possibly would have lended a city's security contract. This is a deputy who is supposed to be assigned duties by the head, but the head finds himself being assigned duties by the deputy. What can be done to clean up what we are seeing and what we are hearing?
Yeah, I think that's a question that everybody's asking, Tony. And I think without putting these in necessarily priorities, I think there's several things. The first is we have to stop and political appointments in places where people do not belong in those positions. It's clearly compromised the capacity of many institutions, not only the police, the prosecutorial authorities, regulatory agencies, and a range of different ones. Just today in Parliament, our president was being asked the question about the appointment of the new NDP, the new head of the National Prosecuting Authority and the processes there, and whether or not that was going to be done independently. And these are important questions to ask, because part of the big problem is the politicization of appointments and putting people that really don't have the capacity, don't have the skills, and are simply there because of their political credit. That's the first one. We've got to stop that. It's got to stop, and we have to professionalize our services and the public service. The second thing is the prosecutorial authorities must act. Whether or not they think they have exactly all the cases in line, they must start those cases. People need to be seen to be something to be happening, and people to be putting under the cosh. Those that are in corrupt positions, that have engaged in corrupt activities, that have allegations against them, let them be tested. Let's go to court. Let's have these cases now, or at least in the foreseeable future, not waiting another 2 or 3 years. The other thing is resource capacitation, in other words, financially. Many of our institutions, if you look at, for example, the National Prosecuting Authority and the forensic investigations of the police services, they're in crisis. The backlogs are massive. We can't even, so even if people get arrested, they oftentimes get off. So the capacitation at an operational level, resources, the necessary kits, the necessary things, the people that are in there, these things need to be prioritized. We have the money. It's not a question of finances. It's a question of the political will to act. I think if those 3 things were to be done within the next while, we would go a long way, not to answering all of our problems, but to really repairing some of the biggest damage and beginning to make people trust again that these institutions are here to serve us and not politicians and not factions.
Political analyst and researcher Dr. Dale McKinley, thank you very much for your time and analysis this evening.